Hello everyone, this is Dawn McArdle of Linkage Design. Welcome to the second in our series of 4 webinars. Just to recap, last time we talked about how to import files into VRED. We set up ambient occlusion and we began assigning materials. Today I'm going to be talking about some texture-based materials and my favorite thing, animation. In the third webinar, which will be on June 12th from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I will be talking about some other lighting options and rendering. And in the fourth webinar, which we don't have a date just yet for, I will be talking about the changes between version 2014 and 2015. Just a few items that I forgot to mention last time. We had a prize given away, and to the second question I asked, and the first one no one knew the answers, so I had asked which button you press to set your home view, and that's here down in the bottom right hand corner is ICV, which stands for Initial Camera View. And when you hit the home button, that sets your view to the one that you set, which is not quite the same as animating a keyframe, which we'll get into in just a bit. And also, depending on what object is selected, you can quickly jump to different viewpoints with this navigation cube. These are not truly orthographic views. So I had promised to talk about how to create a tire texture. What you can start by doing is go to your material editor and create a tire material, which is right here. And just drag that right onto your tire. Once you do that, I have some textures set up, and I have one here that I'm going to drag, you know what, no, I want the tread right here onto my tread area. And this one is going to be diffuse profile and bump profile. I'm going to say OK and not worry that it's not aligned just yet. And I also have a sidewall texture, and I'm going to drag this right onto my sidewall area. And this one will be diffuse markings and bump markings. Now I'm going to hit OK. And if I turn on texturing, shift-click on my tire, you'll see that it is not aligned. To align it, just shift-click on this tire icon, and it jumps right into place where it should be. So there are a few interactive buttons on this manipulator here. This little pink rectangle, if you shift-drag that, that lets you adjust the tread repeat. And in your material editor, the same thing is under Texture Settings, Repeat Profile U. You can drag your slider here to do the same thing. Also, there's a little green rectangle, and this lets you adjust the width of your texture. And that's also found in Repeat Profile V, right here. If you want to see what you're doing without the texturing manipulator on, you can turn off texturing. There's also a blend position slider in your materials, which controls how far the tread rolls over the edge toward the sidewall. So I'm going to darken the diffuse and the bump, or the glossy color of my tire, and I'm going to increase my bump texture to about 10. Let's give it a little more glossiness. There you go, and that's how you create a tire texture. Okay, I'm going to jump right back into the file where we were last time with our sports car. And one thing I forgot to mention over here is about the shadow plane. Turn on preview of my materials and find my shadow and select what's assigned to it. So I have this shadow material on my ground plane, and I just wanted to mention that it is only opaque where the shadow exists. And if you want to darken that, in your shadow material, occlusion intensity makes your shadow darker. You can also play around with the color of that shadow. If for some reason you wanted it blue, you can see an interactive display of the color of my shadow being changed. So I'm going to cancel that, and I'm going to go to a viewpoint where I have already set up into my steering wheel and continue showing you a few more materials. I want to create a leather for my steering wheel. So what I want to do first is create a triplanar material. I'm going to rename that leather and drag it onto my object. And with my texture folder open, I'm going to drag my leather texture right onto my steering wheel. And I'm going to add that to the diffuse, glossy, and bump attributes. Say OK. Now, to increase the bump, go under the bump texture of your leather material, and depending whether the number you slide it to is negative or positive, if you look closely at the light and dark gray bumps, the negative makes the lighter areas raised, and the positive number makes them recessed. So I want them raised. I'm going to bring that around -3 or so. And I am going to darken my leather. And it's a pretty large leather, so I want to hit texturing and shift click on my manipulator, and I'm going to just scale that down so it looks more realistic. And there you go. That's a very fast way to make a leather. You might want to turn off the glossy if you prefer how that looks. Okay, so next I want to show you how to create a wood texture using a reflective triplanar. I'm going to jump to a view I have set up of my door insert. And if you can see, when I isolate this in the scene graph is just one piece of geometry, which wouldn't work if I wanted to assign a different material to, say, the door handle. So what I need to do is separate this geometry. And the place to do that is under your Scene menu, go to Geometry Editor. And within this Geometry Editor, under Separate Objects, there's a separation angle. The default, which is 179, will separate any objects not touching. Sometimes you have to play around with the number to separate objects that are touching. In this case, it will work, so I'm just going to click on Separate, and you can see over here in my scene graph, it created a folder, and now it's split it into 4 different parts. Now, if you want to merge these parts back together into one, there are 2 conditions which must exist. One is they must share the same material, and secondly, they must be grouped together. So with these pieces selected, I'm going to go up to Edit, Group Selection, and click on this group folder, right-click, and go to Edit, Geometry, and Merge Geometry. Now, this is one piece of geometry. I'm going to move this up in my scene graph, and I no longer need this empty group node, so I'm just going to delete it. Okay, so let me isolate this part, and to assign the wood texture, I need to create my triplanar material, which is under Create Convert, Create Material, and I meant to hit Reflective Triplanar. And I will rename this Wood and assign it to my door panel. Now, while I'm in my material editor, I'm going to jump to my environment and make it brighter out, make it even hotter than it is today. by adjusting the exposure level under color correction. I'm just going to do this so you can see the wood pattern, the wood grain a little more easily. So in my texture folder, I have a wood texture, and I want to explain that when you do texture mapping, you want a seamless wood texture. So let me jump over to Photoshop for a moment. This file is a swatch of wood grain, and to check whether it's seamless or not, this is about an 800 pixel image, so I'm going to go to Filter, Other, and Offset, and this is set for about halfway through, horizontally and vertically. And you can see when I do this offset that the left and right sides show where they would meet in the middle, and there is a seam, and there's even a bit of a seam here as well. This is not the kind of texture that would work well unless you want it tiled. Now this one, on the other hand, when I repeat my offset, you can see that the grain changes, but I don't see any seams. So this would be a good example of the kind of texture you want to use in your triplanars. So jumping back to here, I'm going to drag my wood texture, and I'm going to add this to the diffuse, and I'll give it a little bump also. Turn on texturing, and you can scale it up. Now the nice thing about triplanars is if you have a complicated surface with different faces facing different directions, then you can independently control the direction that the texture lays on each surface. And keep in mind, just like the other Autodesk products, red is always X, Y is always green, and blue is always your Z axis. So if I click on, you can see that I can change this wood grain so it's more horizontal. And I'm going to change this surface independently. So probably you want them to match up, but I'm just showing that you can change the direction of each. And if I zoom in, you can see that it blends really nicely around the corners. You can't even tell that there's a seam. Okay, let me unisolate that, and I'm going to turn the sun down a bit by going back to my environment and putting the exposure back at 1. Now, while I'm in the interior, I'm going to jump to a view of my IP, and I want to show you one more material today, which isn't a texture-based material, but this is a way to turn any object into a light source. This is called object lights. And what you want to do, if you see this light blue around my knobs, around my ignition, and the navigation screen, as well as the gauges, the way I created that is by creating just a plastic material. And if you go into your incandescence, turn the color up from black to white. If you want to add a tint in there, you can do that as well. Turn the intensity up to a number, I'll say 3. And when you check this button that says Use as Light Source, and this only works for ray tracing, it turns your geometry into a source that emits light. Also, in your camera editor, under Image Processing, in the Glow and Glare tabs, you can turn on and off Use Glare and Use Glow, and the threshold is like a multiplier for that effect. It is a little bit expensive to render, so I'm going to show you some images that I have already rendered using this. So in this image, you can see that the incandescence material has been applied to my nav screen and the knob. And in this image, the glow has been turned on in the camera image processing attributes. And here I've turned on glare, which adds streaks, and you can control the number and direction of those. Here are some rendered images that are ray traced to show you how this effect looks. And this works very well for lamps. My lamps aren't that intricately modeled, excuse me, but if you have the coils modeled within your scene, you can apply this material with incandescence right to the coils, and they should emit light in a very physically real way. Here's a screen grab from a webinar that Autodesk put together that shows a lamp, and this one is projected using caustics and photons. One thing I forgot to mention is that when you create your tire texture, you can also add a displacement channel. Now this was just a regular donut geometry, and what I did was I added the tread texture as a displacement, and you can see that it physically changed the structure. Here's some other views, and these are just images that I grabbed from the internet. So that concludes what I wanted to talk to you about materials today. And now I'd like to jump into my favorite thing, which is animation. We jump to my home view. And first you need to turn on your animation timeline. That's under your animation menu. And I'm going to click on timeline. And you can see that this numeric graph appeared at the bottom. This is your frame range, and you can set that to whatever you wish. Right now it's set from 0 to 200. And this slider above it lets you focus in on a part of that range. Over here there's a tiny little wrench icon. If you click on that, it gives you some options for setting up those timeline numbers and playback speed, as well as frames per second. Now here in the US, working with NTSC video, we usually use 30 frames per second. If you are working with PAL in European countries, you might want to change that to 25 frames per second. And if you are working with traditional film stock in the motion picture industry, then they usually use 24 frames per second. And gaming industries might use a much higher frame rate. I'm going to keep that at 30 frames per second. And the first thing I'm going to do is get my wheels spinning. I'm going to delete my passenger side wheels. So let me find them in my scene graph. I'm just going to hit delete on the keyboard. They're gone. And now I'm going to select my driver side wheels, and I'm going to copy them over. If you right-click in your scene graph, go to Edit. Down here you have the option to clone or duplicate. Now if you clone, it's going to be a scenario where the slave follows the master. Whatever you do to the clone or to the original will affect the other. So if you change the material of the master or the original wheels, then the clones are going to automatically have the same materials, as well as animation and translation. And it's not going to take up any additional file space. Now if you want them to behave independently, then you would probably want to choose duplicate, and that will increase your file size. Now in this instance, I only need my passenger side wheels to do the same things that my driver side wheels do. So I'm going to go to Clone Mirror X. And there they are. Now if I turn on my transform node, you can see that it's at world center. And if you want to change that between world center and per object, then with each of these objects selected, and you can see that the mirrored wheels are placed in the scene graph right below the originals, I'm going to select all 4 of these. And in my transform window, I'm going to go to rotation pivot, and right now they're at world center. I'm going to move them to object center. There's a little icon in the bottom left-hand corner of your transform box that will do the same thing. So now when I click on my driver front wheel, you can see that the pivot is correctly placed at the center of the wheel, which is what we want, so that it will spin correctly. Now, the place we do most of the animation is in the curve editor. If I go to Shift-E, you can look at the rotation axes and see which you want to rotate about. And we want to go this direction, so that's red, which means X rotation. So I'm going to go to frame 1 in time, and in my curve editor, I'm going to right-click on rotation X and key selected. Now I'm going to jump ahead a couple seconds to 60, and I'm going to change the value to 360 degrees, which is 1 revolution, and I'm going to key select it again. Now when I hit Frame Curves in View, you can see that this curve is created, and it shows that there is animation. So now in my timeline, if I scrub through, you can see that the wheel makes one complete spin and then stops at frame 60. If you want it to continue spinning perpetually, then select that last keyframe, right select on your attribute, and under post-infinity mode, change it from constant to linear. Now it's just going to continue spinning on and on forever. So since we have one wheel animated, instead of going through the process over and over again for the other 3 wheels, all we need to do at this point is copy and paste the animation. So in the scene graph, I'm going to right-click, go up to Edit, Animation, and Copy Animations. And now I'm going to select the other 3 wheels and go to Edit, Animation, and Paste Animations. So now I'm going to make sure that all 4 of my wheels are spinning, and they are. Okay. Now, if you were going to save that animation to use in another scene, and you only would need to ever do this once and you could copy it into all your scenes thereafter, you could select that animation and go to Save, and then select the object you want to add it to and go in your scene graph under Edit, Animation, and Load Animation to Nodes. Okay, now I want to animate the vehicle driving. So I want to make sure that it is selected at the proper level, and it should include the shadow plane so that the shadow moves with your vehicle. Now I want to animate my vehicle driving, so I'm going to do this little cheat where I'm using my windows to space out my vehicle so it moves about 1 car length. And I can see from the axis that I want to move on is green or Y. So I'm going to go to Y translation, make sure I'm at the right place in time, just frame 1, right click, key selected. Now I'm going to jump ahead to frame 60, shift drag my car forward, and right click on Y translation. And we've got animation. Again, I'm going to select the last key, right click, and change the post-infinity mode to linear so that it will continue traveling. Now normally if your vehicle is going to accelerate from a stop, then you'll need to change the tangency. So I have selected the first key for both the wheels and the vehicle, and under tangents I'm going to change that to flat. So now when I do a playback, you can see that the vehicle slowly ramps up and then begins driving. Now I like to do a motion test to make sure that the wheels are spinning correctly with regard to the distance the vehicle is traveling. If I were to render out some frames right now, it might take more time than I want. So what I like to do is change the visualization mode from realistic rendering to another option, in this case surface analysis rendering. Now this is used to analyze surfaces usually created in Alias or another program. I have an animation test here that I'll play. So here I can take a little bit of a closer look at the speed that the wheels are spinning and the vehicle driving. And for this test, I found that it took 50 frames to make it look correct. So I can go and change my animation timing. I'm going to select all the wheels, zoom in on that, and if you drag up and down on this last keyframe or any keyframe, it changes the value of the attribute. If you drag left and right, it changes the timing. So I know that I wanted those wheels to spin 360 degrees, so I'm going to type that in, and I want it to take 50 frames. So now I've got my wheels spinning and my vehicle moving. What we can do at this point is create what are called blocks. And here under our library, it shows each of the geometries that we have animation on. And it's named the same as what is in your scene graph. If you go to Curve and then Create Block, it'll create a block for each of those animations. And with the little X next to the name of the block, you can turn that animation on or off. So for example, if for some reason you wanted your wheels to spin but the vehicle not to drive, then you can turn that particular animation off, or vice versa. I'm going to turn off the rotation of the wheels, and now the vehicle is moving but the wheels are not. So what you can do with those blocks, besides turn animation on and off, is bring them into this, which is your clip editor. This is like a mini editing system that lets you adjust the timing that you've created. Another reason to create blocks is that you can create variants that would let you independently use a keyboard shortcut to turn on an animation one at a time. So within the clip maker, I'm going to right click and say New Clip. And I'll rename this Driving. And I'm going to drag my exterior animation right into this, which is like a folder. With this still selected, I'm going to create a new clip within my clip, rename this Wheels, and I'm going to drag each of my 4 wheel blocks into my wheels, and here they are. So you can see they come in as rectangular blocks, and you can adjust the timing by dragging this horizontally to stretch it or compress it. And by the way, I was wondering how to create this folder within a folder, and I asked the VRED community, and if you don't know about it, Autodesk has this community where you can ask questions and also offer suggestions for new features. Also, LinkedIn has a listserv for their VRED community. So here are my 2 blocks. Now what I want to do is show you a little bit about pivots by animating the door opening. So let me select the correct parts that are my door and isolate that. In my transform window, I'm going to center my pivot. And if you hit Shift Q, then that gives you control for moving your pivot. So with the pivot manipulator, I'm going to shift drag this all the way to the edge of my door. I'm going to turn isolation off. And now, if I try to open this door, you'll see that it is not hinged correctly. It might either intersect your body side, or right now it looks like it's just kind of floating in the air. That's not what we want. So what to do instead is set up what's called a 2-point pivot. Let me move that rotation back to 0. I'm going to isolate my door again. To set up a 2-point pivot system, in your transform window, click on 2 points. It's going to direct you to select the first point. So I'm going to select here at the door crease, and now it asks me to select the second point. I'm going to click here at the bottom of the door. And when I show axis, it shows the axis about which the door is going to rotate. So now, if I turn on my rotation and rotate about the x-axis, you'll see that the door stays correctly hinged when I rotate it. So let me move that back to 0 and set up some animation keys for it. So in my curve editor, I'm going to make sure I'm on frame 1, and I can see that is about the x-axis. I'm going to right-click on my X rotation and key select it. Now I'm going to jump ahead in time, and before I do that, what I should do is turn off the animation for my car driving. I'm going to go to frame 60 again, and this time I'm going to open the door and set a keyframe. I'm going to set both the first and last tangents to flat so that the door slowly accelerates and then decelerates. So now, turn that animation back on. When I play my animation, the door is opening and the vehicle is taking off, which is not exactly what I want. But I can adjust all that in the clip editor. So back to the curve editor, I'm going to create a block for this door animation. First I'll turn off my axis display, and then I'm going to create a block for my door animation, create block, and with that selected and my clip editor open, I'm going to drag that right into my driving folder. So now I want the door to close before the vehicle starts driving. So instead of reanimating that, all I have to do is right-click on it and go to Duplicate Flipped. So I have the door opening. I'm going to move this in time so that then the door will close. And after that takes place is when I want my wheels to start rotating and my vehicle to start driving. And the nice thing about this clip editor is that you can offset your animation easily, which gives you more natural results, because usually in life you don't see things just happening one after the other. Now, one thing to take note of is that when you start manipulating your animation in the clip editor, you need to use the playback controls that are in the clip editor as opposed to the playback controls from your timeline. And also, if you were to go and render this in your render settings, go to animation and make sure you have the correct type selected. If you want to render the animation that we originally created from the timeline, then keep that on timeline. But if you have adjusted things in your clip editor, then make sure you change that to clip. So now let me play back this animation, and it's just going to play for as long as the range of time is happening in my clip editor. I have my car door opening, my car door shutting, and then the vehicle driving. And like I said before, if this is taking too long, you can just drag to shorten the timing and keep playing around with it until it's the way you want it. So I mentioned before that one other thing you could do with your blocks of animation is create variants that can be independently played during the presentation. I'll show you how to do that. I'm going to bring my clip editor, or I'm going to bring my curve editor back up where I can see all my blocks, and I'm going to bring my variant sets up. And we want to be in the Animation tab. Okay, so to set up a variant using your animated blocks, I have a block of the door opening and the door shutting where I just reverse the values. So in your Animation tab, have that open, create a new group. I'm going to rename that Animations. And I'm going to create a new set. I'll say door open. And I'm also going to create another new set and rename it door shut. So let me drag my block for door open into, drag it right into here. And to set up a hotkey, go to General, and I'll say when I click on A, this action will take place. Let me go to door shut, open up my Animation tab, and drag this block into here, go under General, and set up a hotkey. I'll say B. So now, when I'm doing a presentation, if I want to go into the interior, I need only to press my keyboard A to have the door open and B to have the door shut. And of course you can drag any of your blocks in there to make any animation be set up as a variant set that can be controlled by a key that you select. So that is the end of what I wanted to show you for the second webinar. I hope that you all will be able to join us for the third webinar. Again, I'll be covering all the different rendering modes and some more lighting options. Thank you again. This is Dawn McArdle of Linkage Design. Feel free to contact me with any comments or questions.